Hi, everybody. We're going to give people just a minute to get on, and then I have some things I want to share with you. So you just see my face sitting here for a little while while we're getting organized. Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary. I'm glad that you're here this morning. If I'm honest with myself, I think there's a part of me that misses preaching. I don't think I was the best preacher in the world, but it was certainly a great outlet for me and helped get my thoughts together, my feelings out, much like writing does now. But in some ways, I miss it. And we're going to take a stab at this on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Hopefully, I'm not just holding church here or whatever, but I wanted to give it a shot and share my thoughts with you, what I've been thinking about this week and what's been important to me. And hopefully, you'll gain some enjoyment from that. But it's been an interesting journey over the last few months, I guess. January 20th, 21st, I had a stroke and spent a few days in the hospital. The next Tuesday or so, I went immediately into acute rehab, where they taught me how to dress and how to shower and take care of myself, get out of bed, start to walk and start to use my hand and so on. And after a couple of weeks in acute rehab, I was sent down to Kansas City for an intensive rehab that lasted 10 weeks, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week for 10 weeks. And we just finished that up. I just got home yesterday from that and stayed with my daughter in Blue Springs, Missouri, and drove 20, 30 minutes each day into downtown Kansas City and went to a place called Ability KC. There's some videos out there and some records of that, of what I did. But bottom line is I walked out yesterday without a cane. I have I think it's called an AFO on my foot, which is a little brace to keep my foot up, to keep it from sagging. And so I can walk pretty well without a cane, but I probably use the cane a lot, especially on uneven surfaces and outside and things like that for now. And my hand, if you know, you can tell is coming back. There's some movement in it. Hope that doesn't scare you with my big hand right up there. But I have some tape on it that's kind of weird. But there's some movement in it. There's promise there. It needs a lot of work. There's a lot of spasticity in my hand. So it gets really tight, and that just complicates the process. So we fight that all the time, and working through that, we'll most likely do some therapy and some vocational rehabilitation, things like that, getting my okay to drive again and so on. And so we'll be working on that for the next however long it takes, probably years in recovery. But I'm optimistic. I didn't have any speech issues or face things along with my stroke. So we came out of it pretty well. We were real determined to do well, to attack this thing and get through it. I didn't want to fake myself out, and I'll talk about that a little bit today, but committed to working hard, but also to feeling the emotions and doing what I had to do to get through it. So the book, in the middle of all of that, my first novel came out called The Hotel. And so right in the middle of that in March, I committed to coming back and doing a book signing. It was tough to drive 2 hours and try to stand up and address a crowd and so on, but it went well. I think also during the release of The Hotel, I've been thinking about my other book, Being, which released about a year ago. And Being, there were some unfortunate things that I had to go through with that book. But I still believe that book is my book that I'm going to have forever. It's just kind of an eternal thing with me, a permanent thing. And I decided to kind of pick it back up and start promoting some again. So you may see that. But Being is a really special book, a journey towards presence and authenticity. And I believe it provides healing for people. And it is a record of my journey, but also then what I was discovering. And it resonates with people and can help them. There's a workbook that goes along with it. It's a 30-day journey type of thing where you can go even deeper. And so I encourage you to check that out. But also, also tonight, we have a special thing with the Desert Sanctuary. Laura will be on with me, and also a guy named Joe Machuda. And Joe is going to kind of guest host and lead the discussion about, what are you still hanging on to with Christianity? What do you still believe in, and so on. So people that have been through deconstruction, also Aaron Tomlinson and Kyle Butler will be there. And this should be a great discussion. I highly recommend you tune in tonight at 6 Central and see that discussion. We'll broadcast live. All of us are a little shy, about live stuff, but hopefully it'll be worth it for you. Anyway, so what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about words. And there's a blog on Patheos that I wrote a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, about why words were important in my recovery. And when I talk about recovery, I'm probably always talking about two things these days. I'm talking about my emotional, psychological, shadow type recovery. But I'm also talking about I'm talking about my stroke recovery that I'm still going through, that I'm still working through. At times, my stroke recovery has been super encouraging. People say, you're doing so well, you're ahead, you're achieving, you're a star student and all that kind of stuff. There's also days when it's very, very, very frustrating. And one of my prime emotions that I felt through it is sadness. Sadness and frustration. I'll talk about those a little bit in a minute, but there's definitely that, and it's important to recognize it. But when we talk about words and language are so important. Laura and I have been watching Brene Brown, her Atlas of the Heart videos on HBO, and going through that, to hear her articulate how important language is in defining the things we go through. And it's been so good to watch that. But I think when you talk about the importance of words and how to use words, it's also as much or just as important to talk about what not to say and what words not to use. My biggest qualms with religion have been where we use words that bypass. We use words that when we get uncomfortable, we say things. There's platitudes that we say, like God is in control, God has a plan, or God needed another angel. We use all kinds of language like that that really doesn't help us. And so when we're talking about words and language, it's important to think about as much what to say or what not to say as what to say, and what language to use and what language not to use. So as I go through this, I'll be thinking about that. I apologize. I'm not used to speaking. I said that at the book signing when I stood in front of this. It's been a long time since I spoke in front of someone. And so my breath and my voice is not there yet, but bear with me today. So as we begin to identify our emotions, I think identifying emotions is really important in healing. And so for me, that primary method that I talked about in being, and that I talk about most these days, is a process called focusing. It was developed by a guy named Eugene Gendlin, and he says this. He said, "What is split off or not felt remains the same, but when it is felt, it changes. Most people don't know this. They think that by not permitting the feeling of their negative ways, they make themselves good. On the contrary, that keeps these negatives static, the same from year to year. A few moments of feeling it in your body allows it to change. If there is in you something bad or sick or unsound, let it inwardly be and breathe. That's the only way it can evolve and change into the form it needs." So religion teaches us to hope for miracles, and it gets uncomfortable when we talk about our feelings, and so on. It says, your feelings don't matter, they're not important. And when we do that, when we have that process of bypassing over these things that bother us, things we're feeling, those things just get stuffed down. And for me, I describe in the book what happened when, after 20 years of ministry, all of those things started to come out because they hadn't been addressed or fixed or dealt with. A few moments, says, a few moments of feeling it in your body allows it to change. If there is in you something bad or sick or unsound, let it inwardly be and breathe. So just to be present with that emotion in focusing, we say, a part of me feels. And when we can say that, when we can identify that feeling in us specifically or directly, a part of me feels anxious. And sometimes even those are not like real words, or like a part of me feels jittery, or, words that are kind of questionable. But if I can identify exactly how I feel, then that allows that to, as Eugene says, to change, to shift inside us. So I want to talk about some of the emotions or feelings I had going through the stroke recovery. And the first one was sadness. From the first day in the emergency room, when I realized and understood that I'd had a stroke, at first we thought it was a minor stroke, whatever that is. Uh, and it was minimized to us, and we minimized it to others. But then once we kind of realized that was um, something real that was happening, number one, was instantly determined. I'm going to get through this. We'll figure out a way, and I'm determined. But the other thing I felt, and I just looked at Laura and said, you know what? I'm also sad. I'm sad that I'm having to go through this. A lot of things I don't understand and why, and those questions you tend to ask. But I think it was important for me to just to admit that I'm sad. Uh, you know, I don't have to be happy. I don't have to have joy. You know, I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to, um, proclaim or name it and claim it or ignore it or bypass it or, claim a miracle, anything like that. It was really important to admit that I'm sad, because that was what I felt. That was what was coming from within me, was sadness. There were other days when there was extreme frustration, and that caused struggle with Laura and I. Caused struggle in my therapy. It caused struggle just with my day. I remember my daughter. I stayed with my daughter and her husband, and I stayed in the basement. And they have these doors that are cut off doors, really weird, on the laundry room and the bathroom. And I remember the bathroom door it just keeps swinging open. It keeps bumping into me, and I'm trying to, when you sit on the toilet or anything like that, it's a deal. You have to kind of plan and sit down carefully and make sure you don't fall and things like that. And this door kept swinging close and just bumping into me. And I just, out of frustration, punched it, not in a way that would hurt me or hurt the door or anything, but just punched it. Made a loud bang, and Laura was upstairs. She came running downstairs thinking I'd fallen or something, but it's just that frustration. But I think it's important to admit that I'm frustrated. Not that I've got this mastered and I'm gonna, everything's gonna be perfect, but I'm really frustrated because my hand doesn't work and my leg doesn't work right, and it's really frustrating. One day I rolled, I leaned too far to the left and just rolled on my side up against the wall. It's very frustrating to not be able to do what you used to be able to do. So it was important to admit that and identify it correctly, right? It's not that I'm flawed. It's that I'm feeling a real thing because I should be frustrated, right? This is difficult. It's hard. And it's not what I'm used to every day. There were a couple of times that I was dismayed. And I guess that's the best way I could describe it is it's not working out the way I thought it would. It's not, some things are going faster than I would have expected. And some things are really, really slow and frustrating. So frustrated and dismayed. But also there were many times that I was confused. I don't know scientifically, if this is validated or not, but what we talked about some was how much executive function we had. And we're going through all this and lots of planning and lots of, even just the focusing on my recovery took a lot of focus. There was so much, the way we described it is there's only so much executive function that you have. Only so many things you could focus on and give your energy to at a time. So a lot of times it was confusing, and you just had to go back to, well, this is what I can focus on, and it's important for me not to put all these other things on the side burners that I really can't devote any attention to. And I had to set priorities and do what you could do. I always say sometimes that Christianity ruined my happiness, because Christianity told me that there's a lot of pressure in Christianity to be happy, that we should all be happy all the time. And then we would say, no, it's joy. We have to have joy. And a lot of times those were false joys, false happiness, emotional highs and things that didn't really pan out. But I remember my granddaughters. I have two granddaughters that live in Kansas City where I was staying, and they don't always talk to me. They don't always want to be around me. They don't, but sometimes they do. And sometimes they would ask to come down and see me. And so they'd see me, and sometimes I would put on music and they would dance. And I remember one time when they were dancing, and I was listening to music and just kind of into the music. And I remember having this kind of goofy feeling. It felt goofy to me. And I don't remember if someone asked me or I just asked myself, and what is this that I'm feeling? And what I felt was, and I said to myself, I'm just happy. And it surprised me that it felt goofy to be happy. But when I allowed myself to feel it, it was a pure emotion that was healing to me. That just to see my granddaughters dance brought that delight and that happiness that was genuine and pure. So emotions are important. I think identifying them and clarifying them helps. Our language, the way we speak to ourselves and the way we speak to others, is important. It matters. In the book Being, I talk about two words, presence and authenticity. And these words are so important to me that I have tattoos. I can't ever do this, but I have tattoos on my arms of both of these words in Mandarin. And I wish I could say those words to you, but presence and authenticity. Presence I describe as being where you are, being here. It's important in therapy to be where I was. I didn't even talk a lot to the people around me, the other patients, because, like I said before, I had only so much executive function, but it was important for me to be where I was and to be, not 2 weeks down the road when I'm going to go home, but I need to be here and focused on trying to make my finger move, and maybe it's just a little bit at a time, but I need my brain to rewire and focus. And sometimes you would sit and work with your hand and just be exhausted from not running a mile or anything like that, but just moving your finger. You'd be exhausted, but it was important to be 100% there, to be where I was. And I think it's so important in our lives to come to that understanding that the only place you can really be is in the now, is right now. The only place you can live effectively is in the present. So presence, when we go through focusing, it's important to be present with that emotion, to be there with that part of you that's wounded. And when you're just present with it, then it has a chance to heal and shift. So, if I go to the past, I have regrets. If I go to the future, I might have fear or whatever. But it's important to do some planning in the future. It's important to visit the past to heal sometimes, but mostly I should be present. So presence is important, but authenticity is also important. And I describe authenticity as being who you are. being where you are and being who you are. So many of the people I know are trying to be someone else. And when we try to mimic someone else, we try to be someone that we're not. We kind of ignore that inner self, that true self, the part of us that's who we are. Um, and it's never effective. It never works long term. We may be able to imitate someone for a little while and have some limited success. But when we're really inwardly successful is when we are who we are. And so presence and authenticity. But I also found a couple of quotes this week, one of them from listening to Brene Brown, but it's around this word, compassion. I'm going to try to pull it up, hopefully here with one hand, that I can pull up this quote about compassion. Maybe or maybe not. Okay, so it's from the monk Hermes Chaudron. Chaudron, anybody speaks French. Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. So compassion is not something necessarily that you express towards someone you're counseling. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. So compassion never works when we go to church and there's a speaker that speaks to us and have to make an appointment to meet with. Compassion comes with a companion that understands their darkness and can understand your darkness. That's compassion. And compassion is so important in our healing. Compassion is so important with our inner child, to be with and present with our inner child and have compassion for that part of us, but also to have compassion for our inner critic, and so on. Compassion is a big word. Another word that I've kind of come to understand is solitude. And this quote is from Thomas Merton, talking about interior solitude. When society is made up of men who know no inner solitude, it can no longer be held together by love. And consequently, it's held together by a violent and abusive authority. But when men are violently deprived of solitude and freedom, which are their due, the society in which they live becomes putrid. It festers with servility, resentment, and hate. That's Thomas Merton. So kind of goes back to this thought that what someone said, that the Christian of the future will be a mystic or nothing at all. I think that word solitude is so important for us to come away, maybe like Jesus in the garden, to get away, to be with himself, and to know his inner self. So all of those words to me are important. Solitude, compassion, and then all of those words that I went through in my recovery. Our language is important. It's important to think about how we define things and how we talk to ourselves. Preciseness, in our language matters. The words we use matter, and the language we use matters. I want to remind you once again to tune in tonight to hear Joe and Aaron and Kyle talk. They'll be much more exciting than I am, but I thank you for tuning in tonight and for hanging out with me. And we'll see you down the road.